They laughed when I walked into the courtroom wearing boots older than some of their resumes' dust, still clinging to the laces. Names Hal Whitman, 76, retired. Mostly. The coffee tasted burnt. The heater clicked like it had secrets, and in my pocket was a letter I never meant to open. Ever been underestimated so hard, you almost thanked them for it. He shuffled into the courthouse wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big and boots a generation too old. No one looked twice until someone did and laughed. A breeze outside tugged half-heartedly at the faded banner clinging to the lamppost. Eagle's Rest honors our veterans. Its edges curled, weather-stained, forgotten like the day it was meant to commemorate. Inside the courthouse carried the scent of old paper and machine-brewed coffee, a mix of time and tired habit. The walls bore the tint of beige fatigue, and each creaky bench had its own memory embedded deep in the wood grain. Hal Whitman stood for a long moment near the door, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim overhead fluorescence. They buzzed faintly like impatient whispers. He nodded once to no one in particular, then made his way to the back bench, each step slow but assured. His jacket a faded olive drab with frayed edges and a threadbare insignia near the shoulder hung on his shoulders like a borrowed memory. The boots, well, they had seen too much dust and too little polish in recent years, but they still held his weight without complaint. Tommy Diaz, leaning over the clerk's desk with an armful of folders, noticed the old man only when something metallic clicked on the floor. He bent down and picked up a small silver pin, a coiled snake wrapped tightly around the letter V. Curious, he turned it over in his fingers, then walked it over. "Sir, you dropped this." Hal accepted it gently, closing his hand around it like it was something sacred. "Thank you," he said. "Just that, and nothing more." His voice carried a gravelly calm, like the sound of dry leaves scraping pavement. Tommy hesitated a second, nodded and returned to the paperwork, the pin's imagery already fading from his thoughts. At the front of the courtroom, Alec Burnett adjusted his tie in the reflection of his phone screen. "Did Halloween come early?" he muttered to a colleague, eyes flicking toward Hal's seat. The young assistant district attorney smirked and added, "Looks like they're pulling witnesses out of the antique shop." Chuckles followed, muffled but unmistakable. Hal remained motionless. His gaze was fixed forward, not on any one person, but on a point just beyond the present. Jackson Price, the defendant, sat with arms crossed and a face polished for sympathy. His defense lawyer whispered something behind a hand, likely about optics. An old man in a beat-up uniform didn't help the clean image they were constructing. Judge Miriam Cole entered with her usual understated authority. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks as she approached the bench. As she sat, her eyes scanned the room with practiced neutrality until they landed just briefly on Hal. Her brow creased not quite recognition, but the shadow of it. The proceedings began. Legalese filled the air like static charges, motions, objections, denials. Hal sat through it all, a statue in stillness. Only once did he move, adjusting the sleeve of his jacket, revealing the faded hint of a service patch. No one commented. A little girl in the gallery tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Is he homeless?" she asked loud enough to carry. Her mother hushed her, but the question lingered in the room longer than it had any right to. Hal's eyes didn't waver. As witness names were read aloud and shuffled on the docket, his came next. He stood with a quiet effort, unfolding himself like a reluctant memory being summoned. More snickers. Someone near the back leaned over and whispered, "He's their secret weapon." The laughter, though soft, rippled. Judge Cole picked up her docket with deliberate fingers, scanning names, her eyes slowing when they reached his. The laughter dwindled. Her face stiffened, mouth set in a line, neither skeptical nor amused. Whispers, "That can't be the same Whitman." The diner was nearly empty except for the coffee-stained counter, and a man polishing the same spot for the third time. Grady's rag moved in slow circles, the rhythm not for cleaning, but thinking. The bell above the door jingled faintly as Tommy and Hal stepped inside, boots tapping softly on the checkered floor. Grady didn't look up. At first he didn't need to. The scent of old uniforms and older memories had a way of announcing themselves. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their padding split in places patched with duct tape or covered with folded napkins. A chalkboard above the register offered meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and gravy like Mom's if Mom was a trucker. The air smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long, mixed with the ghost of pumpkin pie and something fried hours ago. Tommy nodded toward a booth near the window. "This okay?" he asked. Hal gave a small shrug and slid in his movements, less stiff than earlier, but still deliberate. His jacket creaked as he sat. Tommy waited a beat, then followed. "I figured, after court." Tommy cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Folks were kind of rough. Thought maybe a coffee would smooth that over." Hal's eyes moved slowly from the window to Tommy. "I've had rougher mornings," he said, not unkindly. Grady ambled over, still holding the damp rag. "Well, look what the courtroom dragged in," he said. "Pie or pity, gentlemen?" "Hot water for me," Hal said. "And a slice of yesterday's apple if it's still hanging on." Grady raised a brow. "Don't trust fresh crust, huh? Doesn't tell the truth till it's had time to shrink." Hal replied, voice low. Tommy chuckled awkwardly. "Coffee for me. Black." Grady nodded and turned, but the snake pin caught the overhead light as Hal adjusted his jacket. Just for a second, a glint like a flashbulb. Grady stopped. His back stiffened, rag halfway to the counter. He stared at the pin. Tommy followed his gaze. "That emblem's not supposed to exist," Grady said finally, eyes narrowing. Hal didn't look up. "Then let's pretend it doesn't." Grady's lips thinned into a line. He walked off without another word. Tommy shifted. "So, that pin, I mean, it's not like any I've seen. Just an old unit that don't matter anymore," Hal said. He reached for the hot water when it arrived, cupping the mug in both hands like it anchored him. Tommy pulled out his phone under the table and typed quietly, "Viper Fa, military." Across the diner, a pair of retirees shuffled out, nodding politely toward Hal. He returned the gesture with a subtle tilt of his head. They didn't stare. They didn't ask. Maybe they remembered him, or maybe they just knew how to leave a man his silence. Grady came back, set down the pie with a heavy clink. "On the house," he said to Hal. Hal pushed 2 crumpled bills across the table. "Exact change. That's how I work." "Still a damn mule," Grady muttered, but there was something like respect under it. The diner quieted again. The clock above the kitchen ticked softly. Tommy broke the stillness. "So you two served together." Grady didn't answer right away. He sat down slowly across from Hal, wiping his hands on his apron. "You were with them, weren't you?" he asked, not looking directly. Hal sipped his water. The sound of the mug returning to its saucer was the only reply. Grady let out a slow breath. "Thought so." Tommy looked between them, uncertain whether to speak or just absorb. The tension wasn't angry. It was old. Settled like dust. The jukebox in the corner clicked to life randomly and played half of a Patsy Cline song before going silent again. Grady finally stood. As he walked past Tommy, he leaned in and said almost too quietly to hear, "Kid, don't go digging too deep." Some stories weren't written for newspapers. It was blurry, sepia-toned, and folded at the corners, but Tommy was sure that face hadn't changed. The photo lay atop a stack of forgotten folders in the county archives, its edges frayed like it had been thumbed through one too many times by someone unsure whether to keep or discard it. Fluorescent lights above flickered occasionally, casting long shadows between filing cabinets and dusty shelves. The air was thick with the smell of aged paper and the faint tang of glue. Tommy leaned closer. The young man in the photo wasn't smiling, but there was something steady in his gaze. Rifle slung over one shoulder. Other faces surrounded him, smudged, lost to time, but his eyes were sharp even in monochrome. That expression, calm, settled, just like Hal picking at crust yesterday with that peculiar piece only time could carve. His fingers trembled slightly as he slipped the photo into his notebook and reopened the digital archives terminal. He searched the term again, Viper V. It returned the same line as before. Unit disbanded, designation reclassified. No links, no detail. Just a name in a locked file. Outside, the wind knocked branches against the window pane. Tommy checked the time. Hal had said he'd be home around 5. Just enough time. Hal's trailer sat just off a side road by the creek, gravel crunching beneath Tommy's tires as he pulled in. The place was modest, beige, siding one porch light flickering like it couldn't decide if it still had a purpose. He knocked gently. The door creaked open. Hal looked more relaxed in flannel and suspenders, though the boots remained. He glanced past Tommy to the empty gravel road, then stepped aside. "Come in, but don't mind the clutter." Inside it was warm, the clunking heater doing its best to hold back the creeping chill of November. A single bulb lit the room, hanging above a small round table with 2 chairs. One of them was stacked with unopened mail. The walls held little: a framed flag, a faded calendar with a military insignia, a shelf lined with shortwave radios and coils of wire. Tommy sat across from him. The photo rested under his palm. He placed it gently on the table, sliding it forward. "That you?" Hal stared at it. A long pause. Once he said, voice distant, "Not anymore." Tommy didn't push. He simply nodded, letting the silence work its way into the corners of the room like the scent of coffee grounds and metal. Behind Hal, the closet door hung slightly ajar. Inside, Tommy caught sight of uniforms wrapped in dry cleaner plastic and a shoebox labeled with a date, November 1971. A name tag peeked from the top, Whitman H. On a shelf above it sat a folded letter sealed in a plastic sleeve. Nearby, a small patch, the same coiled snake from the pin, rested in a wooden frame. Tommy lowered his voice. "I just want to understand what that unit was, who you were back then." Hal didn't look at him. Sometimes the people we were don't survive the people we become. Meanwhile, across town, Judge Miriam Cole sat at her dining room table, a cup of cold tea untouched beside her. Papers were spread across the table, old records, citations, a folded newspaper from 2004. She turned a page in her son's final service folder. Her finger paused on a name. Harold W. It was part of a citation for exceptional field coordination. No rank, no unit. Just that name. It floated there, unspecific but familiar. She leaned back slowly, the leather of her chair groaning. Her eyes moved to the photo frame nearby, a younger version of her son. In uniform, smiling faintly under the desert sun. She closed the folder gently, fingers still resting on the edge like she wasn't quite ready to let it go. Back in the trailer, Tommy closed his notebook and stood. "Thanks for letting me in," he said. Hal simply nodded again, same as in the courtroom, same as in the photograph. Tommy walked to his car under a slate-gray sky, the cold biting deeper now. Once inside, he opened his laptop. The photo scanned in seconds, pixel by pixel. He opened his article draft and clicked into the title field. The Ghosts We Forgot Until They Came Home. I didn't come here to relive anything, Hal said, voice low. I came because I was asked. He stood just behind the witness railing, back straight, but not rigid like someone who'd learned to conserve effort. The courtroom, warmer now from the afternoon heater humming in the corner, seemed to hold its breath. Outside, a Veterans Day banner rattled lightly against its post, flapping in the cold November breeze. Inside, dust drifted through golden slants of light, coming through the tall windows like time itself had slowed to watch. Tommy sat off to the side, fingers resting on his laptop's keys, but unmoving. Even Alec Burnett, ever ambitious, always pacing, stood still today. Across the room, Price shifted uncomfortably in his chair, eyes fixed on Hal, as if trying to place a name he hadn't yet realized he already knew. Hal began simply. He spoke about the land boundaries near the creek, his observations about the fencing and old survey markers. It was dry procedural until it wasn't. The distance from the northwest fence post to the burned patch was 874 feet, Hal said. Alec blinked. That's unusually precise. Did you measure it? No. I paced it, counted steps. Wind came from the north about 7 knots. 3 figures, not 2. One moved slower. Judge Cole glanced up. How did you know the wind? Alec asked. Hal's voice remained steady. Old habit. When you've watched rooftops too long, you never stop calculating. Something shifted in the room. It wasn't audible, not exactly, but palpable. Like a key turning in a lock everyone forgot existed. Judge Cole leaned slightly forward, hands folded, her voice careful. Have you served Mr. Whitman? Hal's eyes didn't waver. I was with a unit. One that doesn't usually get thanked. She looked down, then at a folder resting across her lap. She hadn't meant to bring it in, hadn't even opened it in years. But this morning something had compelled her. She flipped it open with slow, deliberate hands. Inside was a creased letter written in blocky penmanship. Near the bottom, one line stood out, circled faintly in blue ink. Tell the man on the roof, thank you. Signed, Jonathan Cole. She didn't look at Hal right away. She looked past him. Through him. My son, she said quietly, wrote that line a few weeks before he was transferred home. He never told me who that man was. Hal's gaze lowered. His shoulders didn't move. His expression didn't change. Was that you? She asked, the words heavier than the silence they replaced. Hal didn't answer with words. He merely gave the smallest of nods once, then turned his eyes to the window, away from the courtroom, away from all of them. The room was silent, the kind of silence that felt sacred. Judge Cole stood slowly. She walked down from the bench, not with authority but reverence. She approached Hal, who didn't move, and extended her hand. He took it after a pause. Her grip was firm, grateful. No speech followed. None was needed. In the gallery, Tommy's fingers finally moved. They hovered briefly before resting back on the keyboard. That's when Price leaned slightly toward his attorney and whispered, barely audible. He was at Hill 9. Tommy caught it. He blinked, typed 3 words. Hill 9 verify. Some men build empires. Others clean up after them. The courtroom was colder that evening, not because of the weather, but because of something heavier in the air, memory perhaps, or consequence. The sun had long dipped below the Montana hills, and the last remnants of light bled through the tall windows in amber ribbons. Hal sat where he always did, not quite in the front, not quite in the back, But tonight, no one dared to laugh. Tommy leaned forward, the glow of his laptop casting shadows under his eyes. He had been piecing together fragments for days now, digging through digital archives, municipal files, even calling a few retired veterans who owed Grady favors. What he found didn't tell a full story, but it told enough. The name of the operation was scrubbed from most records, but a stray folder in the Veterans Archive Room had slipped through the bureaucratic cracks. Operation Sandvale. No details. Just an anonymous citation filed under Joint Tactical Units. Probable. No names except for 3 letters written by hand in the margins, HW. Repeated. 12 times. Each entry stamped with a haunting phrase, operational success, no recovery. Tommy printed it out and placed it neatly beside the judge's bench. Judge Cole didn't look at it immediately. She kept her hands on the folder in her lap, the one with her son's letter, the same one she'd opened 2 days earlier and hadn't truly closed since. Price sat forward now. Gone was the veneer of self-assurance. The once smooth patter had thinned into silence. His fingers tapped his thigh, then stilled. His eyes moved not toward the evidence but toward Hal and stayed there. Hal stood without prompting. His boots didn't echo, but the courtroom still seemed to shudder with the effort. "I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice scratchy like the edge of an old record. "I was asked to speak about what I saw, about some maps, some fences, some records." He glanced toward the gallery, then back to the front. "But the truth is that land's been lied about longer than we've had names to put on deeds. I've watched men twist stories to suit what they need, what they want." Alex shifted uneasily, unsure whether to interject. He didn't. "Operation Sandvale Hall," said, letting the words fall like dust. "We were sent in to pull civilians from a failed raid. The coordinates were wrong. The intel was worse. By the time we landed, the firefight was already over. At least we thought it was." Price inhaled sharply. "It lasted 9 hours, Hal continued. "I stayed behind to clear a path. Some never made it out. Some made it and forgot who helped them get there." Tommy noticed the way Hal's hand trembled, not from fear, but restraint. Judge Cole's voice was soft, but clear. And Mr. Price Hal didn't look at him. "Left early. On his own." "That's a lie," Price stood, his voice cracking. "I was ordered to—" "No one ordered anything," Hal interrupted gently. There was no chain of command left by the 3rd hour. The room quieted again. The only sound was the hum of the heater and the distant whistle of wind against the old courthouse windows. Judge Cole placed the folder atop her papers. "Did you ever tell anyone Mr. Whitman?" Hal took a moment, as if weighing something too large for language. Then simply, "Some stories don't belong in parades." Grady entered the back of the courtroom without a word, cap in hand, his shoulders straight despite the years. "I was at Hill 9, he said aloud to no one in particular. "We thought nobody made it. But someone did. Someone who covered every flank. Got us out while ghosts held the line." Tommy turned slowly toward Hal, realizing the initials weren't just bureaucratic shorthand. They were echoes, remnants. Proof that some men gave more than they could admit and took nothing in return. Price's lips quivered. "You should have let me die." Hal didn't flinch. "I wasn't there for you," he said. "I stayed for the others who didn't make it." The weight of the sentence settled over the room like snowfall. Even Alec Burnett, usually quick to challenge, stayed silent. Words wouldn't suit this. Judge Cole rose, but not to declare. She stepped down from the bench with steady poise and stopped beside Hal. Her hand hovered, then found his sleeve, gentle but certain. "You saved my family," she whispered. "I'll make sure you're not forgotten." Hal never asked to be seen, so when they all stood, he almost turned around to see who they were honoring. The first snow of the season was soft as breath, dusting the courthouse steps like powdered sugar. It hadn't stuck yet, just hovered in the air and melted on contact, but it was enough to quiet the sounds outside. The parade hadn't started, but you could hear the band tuning somewhere near Main Street. A few off-key notes of America the Beautiful drifted faintly through the windows, rising and falling like breath. Inside the courtroom was unusually full for a holiday morning. Veterans Day usually meant flags on mailboxes, free pancakes at the diner, and maybe a handshake or two if someone happened to recognize a face from a newspaper clipping. But today, people showed up early in silence like church. Some wore uniforms. Most didn't. One man had on a ball cap that said USS Coral Sea, CV-43 in gold thread, the edges frayed. A woman clutched a photograph in her lap, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. No one spoke above a whisper. Hal entered the room slowly, just as he always had, boots quiet on the wood. He didn't look up, didn't scan the crowd, didn't seem to notice it was fuller than usual. He carried no papers, no medal, no family member beside him. Just a worn coat and a folded letter in his inside pocket. He moved toward the center aisle. His place here was done. He had spoken reluctantly. He had testified precisely. And now he intended to leave quietly. Tommy was waiting just inside the door, holding a small wooden box with both hands. He looked nervous. Younger than usual. "Mr. Whitman," he said softly, stepping forward. Hal blinked at him but didn't stop walking. Tommy matched his stride. "It's from her. Well, from him, technically." He offered the box. Hal stared at it a moment, then accepted it without a word. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was familiar, angular, clipped. "You kept me alive. Thank you. J.C." Hal stared at the signature. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, though the room was warm. Outside, the first few notes of the parade began, this time in tune. Brass swelled gently, not loudly, but enough that it pressed against the courthouse windows like waves against old glass. Judge Cole stood in the back, not in robes today, but in a dark coat and gloves. Civilian again. She didn't speak, only nodded once. Hal nodded back, slid the letter into his coat pocket, and turned toward the aisle. That was when the old man stood. No one prompted him. He just rose slowly, spine protesting. Then he nodded a barely perceptible motion and kept his eyes on Hal as he moved. A second later, a woman across the aisle stood too, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire courtroom was on its feet. No clapping, no gasps, just a quiet current of reverence, human and unplanned. It moved through the benches like wind through wheat. Hal paused once, just briefly. His eyes flicked to the side as if trying to find the person everyone was standing for. He didn't. He walked on. Price, hands cuffed and eyes down, stood last. No one told him to. He just did. Tommy watched it all from his place near the aisle. He glanced toward Grady, who had slipped in unnoticed, and was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, cap low. Tommy leaned in and whispered, "He didn't come here to speak. He came here to remind us how to listen." Outside, snow continued to fall quietly, steadily. Later that day, a new photo went up in Grady's diner window. It was black and white, slightly blurry Hal, alone at the counter, steam rising from his cup. Below it, handwritten in chalk on the glass, "Some heroes don't march. and below that, a plaque screwed into the wood near the register. Coffee paid for by someone who asked for nothing. Even on the quietest mornings, some silences speak louder than applause. The man who once sat unnoticed in the back row had walked out without medals but left behind something far rarer, respect earned without demand. In a world too quick to judge by polish and noise, Hal reminded us that dignity often wears scuffed boots and speaks in measured words. Like a lantern left burning on a porch long after dusk, quiet kindness lights the way more surely than banners ever could. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps tomorrow is a good day to look twice and smile first.